It was the kind of joke that got easy laughs in a room full of powerful men. A sarcastic remark about officers who'd never seen a battlefield, made by a celebrated Navy SEAL admiral at a private donor's event. He didn't know the woman in the crisp service dress uniform near the back. He didn't know she was a forensic auditor for the Naval Criminal Investigative Service. And he certainly didn't know that for the past 11 months, she had been meticulously building a case that would end his career, his freedom, and his legacy. His punchline was her starting pistol. The chandeliers in the Pentagon's Hall of Heroes glittered over a sea of dress whites and dark suits. Admiral Richard Duke Coulter, a bull of a man whose chest was a mosaic of valor, held court near the podium. His voice, a familiar rumble from a dozen media interviews, carried easily over the clink of crystal. "And I tell my young SEALs," he boomed, pausing for effect, "there are two types of officers in our modern Navy. The ones who get their nails dirty with seawater and gunpowder, and the ones who get manicures while pushing paper in crystal palaces." A wave of chuckles rolled through his audience of defense contractors and retired flag officers. His eyes swept the room, missing nothing, yet seeing only admirers. You can usually spot the latter by the pristine, unearned ribbon stacks on their chests. All polish, no punch. Near the back, Captain Elise Vance stood perfectly still. Her uniform was impeccable, her posture straight as a mast. The single silver oak leaf on her shoulder seemed to glow under the lights. She offered a thin, non-committal smile to the polite laughter around her. She had been invited as a courtesy, part of the Navy's effort to showcase its diverse leadership. To Coulter, she was just another faceless staffer, another manicured officer. He never saw her eyes, the cool gray of a winter sea, fix on him. He didn't see the slight, almost imperceptible tightening of her jaw as his joke landed. It was the final piece of motivation she didn't need, but would gladly accept. For 11 months, Elise Vance had lived in a silent world of spreadsheets, bank ledgers, and encrypted files. Her battlefield was a darkened monitor in a secure NCIS annex. Her enemy was not a foreign fighter, but a ghost in the financial system. A complex web of shell companies, diverted funds, and fraudulent invoices tied to a black ops budget codenamed Trident Stingray. The money, meant for covert ally support and clandestine equipment, was bleeding out into offshore accounts. The digital trail was a masterpiece of obfuscation, but Vance was a patient hunter. She had followed the ghost from Cyprus to the Cayman Islands, to a dummy corporation in Delaware called Patriot Shorefront Logistics. Every path, no matter how cleverly hidden, had begun to curve back toward a central hub of influence and authority. The contracts were authorized by signatures she knew well. The missions were signed off by a legend. The ghost had a name, and it was Richard Coulter. But proving it was like trying to arrest a hurricane based on the damage it left. He was protected by his myth, by his connections, and by a system that revered its warriors. That night, after the dinner, in her Stark apartment, Vance pinned a photo of Coulter accepting a corporate speaking engagement fee on her evidence board. Next to it, she placed a screenshot of the joke from a social media post by an attendee. The caption read, "The Admiral tells it like it is." She looked from the smiling, arrogant face to the cold financial data. The public persona was a fortress, but she had found a crack, not in the finances but in the man. His ego, his sense of untouchable superiority, was a vulnerability. He had just publicly defined credibility as coming only from the battlefield. She would use that definition against him. Her next move was not a subpoena, but a quiet request to the Judge Advocate General's office for a review of old after-action reports from Coulter's most famous mission, Operation Swift Tide. If the myth was his armor, she would start by checking for rust. The NCIS annex hummed with the low sound of servers and focus typing. Vance's workspace was an island of intense quiet. Her request about Operation Swift Tide had been approved, buried in a routine audit of historical data. The official reports were predictably glowing, a tale of heroic SEALs rescuing hostages from a militant compound. But Vance wasn't reading the text. She was reading the metadata, the attachments, the logistics appendices. Her focus landed on the medical evacuation manifest. One Chinook helicopter, call sign Package 6, was listed as evacuating 4 SEALs with gunshot wounds and 2 with burns. Standard. But the attached fuel log for Package 6, a dry administrative footnote, told a different story. The helicopter's weight, calculated from its fuel burn and flight time, was off by nearly 800 pounds. Too heavy, as if it was carrying something not on the manifest. A separate thread, pulled from the Patriot Shorefront Logistics Shell Company, showed a payment of $850,000 made 3 weeks after Swift tied to a South African arms dealer. The invoice described mining equipment. Vance cross-referenced the dealer. His specialty wasn't mines. It was Soviet-era portable anti-aircraft missiles, systems known to be in the arsenal of the very militants from the Swift-Tide compound. A cold understanding settled in her stomach. The ghost in the machine wasn't just stealing money. It was orchestrating a side business. The weight discrepancy in the helicopter, was it payment? Were Coulter's men, under the fog of war, smuggling captured enemy weapons out to sell? The Admiral's joke about getting nails dirty took on a sinister, literal meaning. She needed a witness from inside the fortress. Using non-attributable databases, she began profiling every enlisted SEAL and junior officer who served under Coulter in that era, looking for fractures. She found one. Senior Chief Petty Officer Marcus Shady Graves, medically discharged with a busted knee 2 years prior. His service record was sterling, but his civilian life was a spiral: divorce, debt, living in a worn-down apartment complex in Norfolk. A man who knew secrets and was being crushed by the world the secrets built. Vance didn't approach him as NCIS. She became Elise from the Veterans Advocacy Office, following up on his benefits. Over bad coffee in his sparse apartment, she listened to him talk about the pain, the neglect, the feeling of being used and discarded. They take everything from you, and then they forget your name, he muttered, staring at his hands. She saw the anger, the betrayal. She carefully, over a second visit, steered the conversation to Swift-Tide. His face closed up. That's ancient history. We did our job. Got the cheers. But his eyes darted to a small footlocker in the corner. Later that week, an anonymous parcel arrived at Vance's secure P.O. box. Inside was a small, encrypted digital voice recorder. The file contained no confession from Graves, but it contained his raw, angry monologue about the logistical cluster after Swift-Tide, about the extra cargo on Package 6 that the team was ordered to never log, about the cold fear when they realized what they'd been used for. It was hearsay, it was circumstantial, but it was a crack in the wall. Coulter's fortress had a disgruntled former guardian. Vance knew she had to move quickly. Coulter's ego made him blind to threats from below, but his instincts for operational security were still sharp. If he sensed a shift in the wind, people like Graves could become silent permanently. The atmosphere in Admiral Coulter's office was one of controlled power. A wall of windows looked out over the Norfolk Naval Base, ships like toys in the bathtub. He was meeting with a close circle, his lawyer, a slick man named Carson, and his trusted aide, Commander Briggs. A news alert about a financial review of certain special operations funds had just ticked across the screen. "It's a fishing expedition, Duke," Carson said, waving a hand. "NCIS, probably some bean counter with a grudge. They do this every few years." Coulter leaned back, a smirk on his face. "I remember one at that donor dinner. A captain, looked like she'd never left a climate control building. Probably her." He laughed, a short, harsh sound. "Let them fish. They'll find clean water and healthy fish. My record is my armor." But Briggs looked uneasy. "Senior Chief Graves has been vocal, sir. In his circles. Bitter. He's been talking to someone. A woman from Veterans Affairs, but her credentials are thin." The Admiral's smile didn't fade, but his eyes hardened. "Graves is a broken tool. No one listens to broken tools. But tools can be put away." He gave a slight, almost invisible nod to Briggs. It wasn't an order. It was an understanding. A reminder that loyalty was enforced. Across town, Vance was no longer just auditing. She was building a case for conspiracy and arms trafficking. The voice recording from Graves was the key that let her legally pursue the financial trails with renewed vigor. She obtained a secret warrant for the bank records of Coulter's younger brother, a failed boat salesman in Florida. The money trail became a flood. Millions had flowed from Patriot shorefront into the brothers' accounts, then into luxury purchases, a boat, ironically named the Swift Tide, property in the Bahamas. Vance arranged a second meeting with Graves, this time in a safe house. She revealed her true identity. "I'm NCIS Senior Chief, and I need your help to stop this." He was terrified, furious at the deception, but more afraid of Coulter's long reach. "You have no idea what he can do," Graves whispered. "I have an idea," Vance said calmly, showing him a photo of his ex-wife and daughter who had recently moved. "And I know he's already looking. I can place them under protection. I can protect you. But I need you to testify about the extra cargo on Package 6. About the orders." Graves stared at the photo, his tough facade crumbling. He was trapped between a vengeful king and a determined queen. He nodded once. It was enough. As Vance left, she felt the target on her own back intensify. Coulter would now know the bean counter was hunting in earnest. The next move would be his. She prepared for a storm, securing all her evidence with the Department of Justice and sending copies to a secure location only her direct superior knew. The battlefield was no longer the spreadsheet. It was the real world, and the rules of engagement had just changed. The pressure came not as a direct attack, but as a subtle, pervasive siege. Vance's superior at NCIS called her in, his face strained. "Elise, I'm getting calls. Questions about your methods. Suggestions you're on a witch hunt, obsessed with taking down a hero. The Admiral is well-connected." It was a gentle suggestion to back off, wrapped in a warning. Her access to certain databases was suddenly under review. A formal complaint was filed about her coercive interview with a veteran, Graves. The system Coulter had built around himself was flexing, trying to crush the threat. Vance worked longer hours, in near isolation, trusting only a tiny, vetted team. Coulter, meanwhile, decided to go on the offensive in the public arena. He gave an interview to a major news network, sitting in front of the American flag. He spoke of honor, sacrifice, and the new, risk-averse bureaucracy that threatened operational security by second-guessing warriors. "We used to worry about the enemy," he said, his voice dripping with patriotic concern. "Now we have to worry about our own, armed with clipboards and suspicion." He never mentioned Vance, but the portrait was clear. He was framing the narrative, painting her as the villain of his story. The tactic was brilliant and infuriating. Vance watched the interview in her dark office, feeling the walls close in. He was using his legend as a shield and public opinion as a weapon. She knew a direct assault was doomed. She needed to flank him. Her break came from the most mundane of places, the Delaware Secretary of State's website. The registered agent for Patriot Shorefront Logistics had to be a real person. It was a name she had overlooked, a retired Marine master sergeant named Rollins. When she dug into Rollins, she found he wasn't just a paper name. He was Coulter's first-ever squad leader, a father figure. And he was dying of pancreatic cancer in a hospice in Arizona. Vance took a personal risk. She flew to Arizona, not as NCIS, but as herself. She sat with the frail old man, surrounded by the smell of antiseptic and mortality. She showed him no documents, made no accusations. She simply talked about duty and about lies that outlive the men who tell them. "I think you were trying to help an old friend secure his future," she said softly. "But the future he's building is on a foundation that betrays everything you both served." Tears welled in the old man's eyes. He wasn't afraid of prison. He was facing eternity. The fear of leaving a legacy of shame was greater than his loyalty. In a trembling voice, he gave her the key, the location of a private, encrypted email server Coulter used. "The password is his call sign from our first tour, plus the date of Swift Tide." It was a direct line into the Admiral's most private communications. Back in Norfolk, the storm broke. Graves was found in his apartment, the victim of an apparent break-in that looked staged. He was alive, but badly beaten, a message written in violence. Vance got the news as she was decrypting the first emails from Coulter's server. The messages were explicit, discussing arms deals, payments, and contempt for the paper pushers who could never understand. The ghost was now screaming in text. Coulter had overplayed his hand. The attack on Graves turned a financial suspect into a violent criminal conspirator. Vance had both the digital sword and the moral high ground. It was time to end the hunt. The arrest was planned for a quiet Monday morning at the Admiral's quarters to avoid a spectacle. But Coulter, sensing the tectonic shift, decided on one last act of theater. He arranged a final press conference at the base memorial, positioning himself among statues of heroes. Vance learned of it and changed her plan. She would not let him control the narrative until the end. With a team of trusted agents and federal marshals, she converged on the memorial just as Coulter was beginning to speak to a small group of reporters. He was in full dress uniform, a walking monument. And so we must always guard the honor of those who serve from threats both foreign and, regrettably, domestic, he was saying when he saw her. She walked purposefully through the crowd, not in uniform, but in a dark professional suit. The agents flanked her. The reporters fell silent, cameras swinging. Coulter's eyes locked with Vance's. For the first time, he truly saw her, not as a backdrop figure, but as the architect of his ruin. The recognition was instant and terrible. Admiral Richard Coulter, Vance said, her voice clear and carrying in the open air, devoid of drama. I am Captain Elise Vance, Naval Criminal Investigative Service. By the authority of the United States Department of Justice, you are under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, wire fraud, and arms trafficking. She listed the charges like facts, which they were. Coulter's face went from shock to a twisted parody of his earlier charm. He attempted a laugh, addressing the cameras. You see, this is what I mean. A parade of paperwork over principle. Vance didn't engage. She simply took another step forward and held out the printed warrant. An agent moved to secure him. As the metal cuffs clicked close around the wrist that had once held a Medal of Honor, the sound was deafeningly loud in the stillness. The image, the legendary Admiral in his glorious uniform, arrested by the unassuming woman he'd once joked about, flashed across the world. His myth shattered in the click of a latch. In the subsequent trial, the evidence was overwhelming. The emails, the financial trails, the testimony of Rollins, submitted before his death, and even the recovered Graves. Coulter's defense crumbled. He was convicted on all counts. On the day of sentencing, Vance stood quietly at the back of the courtroom. The judge asked Coulter if he had anything to say. He stood, looking older, and his gaze found Vance. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a hollowed-out understanding. He had defined a warrior by his visible scars and combat. She had proven that the most dangerous battles are often fought in silence, with integrity as the only weapon. He had never seen her coming because he never understood the terrain. He nodded once, a bitter acknowledgement of her victory, and remained silent. As he was led away, the story that ended was not one of battlefield glory, but of a slow, corrosive betrayal hunted down by the very polish he despised. The fortress had fallen, not to a siege, but to the relentless, quiet truth. This response is AI-generated and, for reference purposes only,